welcome everyone for this roundtable, the first roundtable series actually that we have in this format, coming from our content leads in our fellowship from the Digital Economist. I am Jose Carvalho. I'm executive director for the Center of Excellence of the Digital Economist, where we run our work groups, our fellowships, and where we focus on topics around human-centered usage of technology for the creation of a human-centered economy as well. We have this series on this kind of thought leadership that we work on throughout the year, and we opened this series because we wanted to create something that enables us to be connected to the community, and for the community as well to see what's going on within the Center of Excellence of the Digital Economist, in particularly our thoughts and also the thoughts of those that collaborate with us. So we run these sessions on a bi-weekly basis, and today we are going to look into fixing the voluntary carbon markets, which is a topic coming straight from our sustainability focus area, which, as I mentioned, is done with some of our colleagues, but also our most esteemed network. There's just a few housekeeping rules that I would like to just mention. So obviously, this will be an interactive session as well. So we do encourage a lot of participation from everyone. You can actually put things into the chat. You can raise your hand as well, and we'll try to address your comments and your questions in the audio and video session as well. One thing that I would ask everyone as well, use the chat, put your LinkedIn if you want, tell us where you're joining from, and try to be on mute if you're not speaking so that we can hear through the speakers, but then obviously raise your hands and we'll try to bring you into the conversation. So with this, I would like to actually start and hand over to Bruce Armstrong-Taylor. Bruce is our chair for the sustainability group. And with his group, in fact, he's actually put together this day for us. So I'll let you do the introductions, Bruce, and looking forward to hear from everyone.
Thank you, Jose. Good morning, good day, everyone. I always say good morning because I'm in a part of the world where it is morning. But my best for you, wherever in the world you're joining from. A lot of friends have joined as well. So I'm going to take just a second to tell you how we're framing this particular conversation. This morning, I did what I do at least 5 times a day. I went right to ChatGPT, and I hold actual conversations with ChatGPT, and it was quite interesting on the issue of the voluntary carbon markets. And it was particularly interesting on the cautionary notes that it had. And what I would ask each of you to do as we begin this is just say, what is it that you personally have at stake in the larger issue of climate change? And then what do you have at stake in the voluntary carbon markets? And the reason I ask that is because it is very clear to us who watch this field extensively that this is going to be a major mover in the avoidance and reduction of carbon and greenhouse gases. And I don't want to minimize that. It's struggling to gain its feet. It's still a new market, a nascent market. The market is not made at all. It has a huge amount of growth in front of it. And whether we're corporations or individuals, we really need to look at how we participate in this. At the same time, we're reducing our own personal carbon footprints and household carbon footprints and corporate carbon footprints. We need to be actively engaged in this and understand this market just the way we understand any other electronic trading fund markets, right? This is a commodities market. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Matt Yarger, who's subject matter expert in the field, and he actually will introduce each of the panelists, tell us a bit about him and what he's doing. And please, what we would ask is that about the first 30 minutes, plus or minus, is really constrained to the primary panelists unless you have something urgent that you believe it really moves the discussion forward. However, in the second half, we open it up then for a very discursive conversation among everybody. So please, Matt.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks, Jose. Thanks for having me and allowing me to be the moderator on today's panel. I'm Matt Yarger. I am the founder and CEO of Demia and part of the sustainability group at the Digital Economist. Also part of the digital methodology group at Gold Standard. So I work heavily on the voluntary carbon side of things, focused predominantly on data. My background is in cybersecurity and cyber operations at the NSA and digital forensics at the Department of Defense Cyber Crime Center, where I worked for about a decade before transitioning to work in peer-to-peer data technologies, immutability, blockchain, and those kind of things for a German nonprofit known as the IOTA Foundation. Now I work completely and holistically in what we're now calling verified carbon markets, which is the regulated plus the voluntary side of the market. So I'm excited to have this conversation today because we've seen a stagnation on the market over the last 2 years. And we have some great panelists here and a great audience as well to really hone in on three specific questions. So those three questions we're going to look to pursue today are what's broken and who needs to fix it? Uh, can technology solve the problem, or is there more that's needed? And how do we incentivize quality over quantity? How do we build this into something that's a well-functioning market in the way that we're used to seeing from a financial perspective? And how do we incentivize buyers to come in, participate, and unify how regulated and voluntary markets interoperate in a number of different ways? So I'm going to hand it off to Maria to give an intro, and then we'll go through the rest of the panels.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for having me today. I'm looking forward to a very exciting conversation. I'm a partner with ESG Book here in New York. We're a European-based ESG and climate data analytics and scores provider, which means that we are providing data and technology to asset managers, banks, a wide variety of players, be it hedge funds or asset owners or foundations, build investment products or manage their investment products and their investment portfolios. So I will be bringing a perspective of the financial markets to this conversation, which I think is a very important one. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Robin?
Thanks, Matt. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to get involved here. So my name's Robin Daniels, and I'm here as founder and CEO of the Darwin Fund, which is a new California-based conservation restoration fund I'm launching with Terry Tamminen, who many of you will know or know of. And I'm also concurrently co-founder and CEO of Canopy Pact, which is a spin out from the University of Cambridge, from the Cambridge Centre of Carbon Credits. We've just, in the last week, completed the spin out and the charity registration for that. The focus there of the research has been digitizing the voluntary carbon market. As where they started, they quickly uncovered all sorts of interesting issues around overcrediting, which, along with many other people in the background, led to the infamous Guardian article. And we are where we are. So the intention now is on not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but fixing what we have and thinking through how we can make an actual functioning market.
Thanks, Robin. And then, Bruce, do you want to give 30 seconds on what brought you into sustainability in the first place? You're muted as well.
I was trying to follow the rules. I would say I came at sustainability. I mean, it goes back literally to decades to the issues around the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts in the United States, and working with the now late Senator Edmund Muskie on the very earliest efforts in the United States, which led to the development of the EPA, Environmental Protection Fund. So I've been at this a long time in one way or another. And I do believe that the digital transformation of the global economy is a key factor in how we, in fact, decarbonize, eliminate greenhouse gases in the economy. And I believe, in fact, that there is a digital transformation that is now required for the voluntary carbon markets and for the regulated markets as well, the compliance markets. So that's what brings us right to this conversation, is I wanted to explore what that looks like.
Perfect. Thanks, Bruce. So let's go ahead and dive directly into the questions. For question one, we often discuss governance, transparency, and trust as barriers in the voluntary carbon market, but where does the real accountability lie? Is it with project developers, buyers, standards bodies, purchasers, investors, major emitters, or policymakers? Who needs to step up first, and how can we hold them accountable, or should we be holding them accountable? So who wants to take the first step at that concept and what's broken, and who's the one that needs to be responsible for actually coming in and fixing the situation to help scale this from a $2 billion a year in transaction volume market to potentially a $1 trillion transaction volume market by 2040 to 50.
So, Matt, let me have the first shot at this. I couch my comments from a forest carbon point of view. There's lots of other carbon around, but let's start there. So my view is that it's a systemic problem, and assigning accountability or responsibility or blame is not necessarily the most helpful thing to do. In many ways, I think it's not surprising that we're here. I mean, the carbon market, forest restoration, regeneration, conservation, these have all been around for a very long time. The carbon market, less so. It's not been around for too long, and yet it's growing incredibly quickly, even though it's far too small at the moment. And we're in this. This leads to, when you get a fast-growing, immature market, the cracks start to appear pretty quickly. And layer on top of that just the complexity of the challenge, and then the kind of political toing and froing around it as context, and then geopolitical country by country complexity. It's kind of not surprising that we are where we are in a lot of ways. There are a lot of intermediaries around. Intermediaries tend to appear when there isn't a functioning market, and my personal view is that dysfunctionality in the market kind of encourages that. And so we have this fog, we have the information asymmetry problem. Everyone's scoring their own homework. You can't compare one project with another particularly easily. And so if you take a step back and you, with a kind of a clean sheet of paper, and what would you do differently? You'd establish really clear lines of sight between serious sources of investment and great projects. Easier said than done, right? But there is a lot of money out there looking for great projects, and there are some great projects out there also looking for funding. So my short, kind of trite response is, let's forget everything. Let's forget reality as it is for a moment. Let's just suspend that and imagine what a proper functioning liquid market at scale for nature-based carbon looks like. What do we need to get there? Sorry, one final point I will say is that there's a lot of attention focused quite often on project developers and project proponents on the ground. Yeah, these people typically are not investment bankers or venture capitalists or standards experts. They are driven by impact and conservation and nature. It's not in their skill set. And yet they're spending 95% of their time haggling one-to-one over pricing of carbon credits and worried about where the next dollar is coming from rather than doing impact. We really need to enable them to do what they're skilled at.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a gross overcomplication of what's required by the various stakeholders, and kind of a misunderstanding of where the supply and demand needs to come from, and just too many people in the middle. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, I mean, of course it's hugely simplistic, but I'm talking a lot for at the moment with institutional investors, for example, pension funds, insurance companies, who for different reasons are very motivated to try and first of all figure out what their exposure is in terms of their existing portfolios. That's their first problem. They know it's a big issue. They don't know how big. Um, and then trying to figure out what does good look like. If you think of the value chain from forests to long-term institutional investment and sovereign wealth, um, what does that growth curve look like? What are congruent KPIs that will change and evolve and develop over time, but pull the project through so that we, as quickly as possible, start to identify not only high integrity projects, because that could mean anything to anybody, right? But projects that are adjusted for risk, projects that are institutionally investment grade projects in nature is kind of where we need to be getting to, with all the transparency and rigor and visibility that markets can bring, without bending the conservation restoration effort out of shape, and never forgetting the importance of local communities and indigenous engagement as part of this, not only for social equity point of view, which of course is paramount, but one of my personal soapboxes is let's not lose the tacit knowledge that people living in these places have in co-creating reliable solutions to some of these problems.
Maria, Bruce, do you have comments as well?
Yes, and well, so I think one of the reasons why I was invited to this conversation in the first place is I'm one of those impact people who then realized that if we're going to move the needle, maybe I need to start working with the financial markets. And so I have about a decade in sustainable investing, responsible investing, being part of building out the whole ESG rating landscape, and which has been up until now, very much not regulated market, right? But it's despite all that has been able to build tremendous trillions and trillions under assets under management. So you can do it without regulations, and now we have the EU pushing as well. But I want to take a step back here and actually divide it into two separate things, because you have a primary market and you have a secondary market. And the secondary market is where the investors are, where the stock exchanges are, and the primary markets are where we're talking about direct purchases or different buying different sorts of assets. And we need to treat those as they're interconnected, of course, because the one can't work without the other, but they're also separate. They have their separate different challenges. And I wanted just to look at more of the secondary market, the stock markets, and other ways of tradings and platforms, and the providers that are very active there. We see a tremendous interest. I mean, I was just Bloomberg just closed a deal on Viridios, an AI-enabled carbon credits projects and data. We have ICE, New York Stock Exchange, just announced that they're launching later this year Green Trace. You have in Europe the Swiss Six Group, which their new CEO is from NASDAQ, and they just invested in Carbon Future. So there's a lot of movement towards making and building out a very well-functioning carbon credits market. But and this is where technology comes in. So we're going to talk more about that. But I just wanted to plant some of the ideas here. To a well-functioning secondary market, you need great liquidity. And if you look at the stock market, everyone in the world knows what a stock is. They're very common, they have certain set of characteristics, and you know what you'll get, right? But if you look at the carbon markets, there are different. We're talking about a high quality carbon credit. What on earth is that if you ask an investment banker, right? So we need to do ourselves some favors here. If we're going to keep a lot of different standards, there needs to be some sort of harmonizations in between. And we have some great technology with, underway. I mean, that DEMIA, for instance, provides. So we need to look at how we can help ourselves in this moment and really create harmonizations that then can create some fungibility so that you can create instruments that can be traded. I mean, I think if we look at the financial markets and building investment products, that's how responsible investing also grew. If you look at a derivative, for instance, it's not connected to a physical asset. It's a group of financial instruments that the market is trying to make money on. So I think there are some learnings to be had here to make sure that we have the money, the funding that can come from very large institutional investors into our market that Robin was talking about. And I'm very positive, and I think technology will help us get there, but we also need to work together to decide on what standards and how you're going to define certain instruments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we have two different personas, and both of y'all kind of highlighted that in your own ways, that are active in the market. It's the ones that are there to make the impact, and they want to be on the ground building the solutions that are capturing carbon and methane and doing all these things, protecting forests, conserving different biodiversity effects. And then we've got the ones that want to treat it like an asset and financialize it. And they kind of butt heads sometimes. You see the ones wanting to make an impact, and they're like, no, don't financialize nature. It's nature. We need to value it at what it is. But then the financial guys are like, well, we do value it at what it is. But the way we do that is by making it valuable and creating a system around it that enables it to become an asset and to scale and grow in a way that we're not doing in a very clear way, it seems like. Bruce, do you have thoughts on that too?
I do, and I want to add one tertiary group of people is that still missing in this market in a very public way are analysts. There isn't a subject matter analyst body or set of bodies that has really arisen in this market. Every consultancy has a working group in this field, right? They've got a specialty in the field, but they're not adding any value to it at this point. And that I would say the names, but that would be unfair. And I think that there needs to be a specialist analyst market that helps both the buyer and the sellers find each other and create new value. And that, we see it in every other industry sector. We haven't seen it yet in the carbon markets in general, the emissions markets, and it needs to be there. The second thing I would say is that so far, this is not seen as an investment market. It is seen as kind of a nonprofit at best, NGO market, and
Philanthropic.
Philanthropic, and it needs to change and become a real market with real asset values and real investor opportunity, not investor do-good.
Yeah,
Matt,
yeah.
just jump in really quickly. I think there's a really important bit of connective tissue which is often missing, which is you were talking about conservation and then the financial community, and of course they're both important aspects. In the middle are often privately driven projects on the ground, intimately with local communities, that really focus on local economic activity and the opportunity to develop different sources of revenue from nature. And carbon credits can be part of that, but they're not the only one. The sale of non-timber forest products, ecotourism, innovation, all sorts of opportunities there to gradually close the gap, making a living forest more valuable than a dead one. And in the process, creating new employment, education, life opportunities for people living in those places. Now there's not enough of that yet, but there are some really great examples of where that's happening very well.
Yeah.
And it's important because at the root of all of this is an opportunity cost on the ground that people face on a day-to-day basis in their lives. What do we do with this place we're living in? How do we manage it? How do we interact with it? And addressing that economic question is fundamental if we're going to move the needle on any of these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to be conscious of time. So let's go ahead and transition this into the second question. We're seeing more digital tools, blockchain, AI, IoT, satellites, a number of other things that generating data in this space aimed at improving the carbon market's integrity. But is this a technical problem that needs to be solved with technology? Is that the key problem, or does the market need a structural reform alongside this kind of transformation towards digitization? What's the balance that we should be looking here for on technology to solve the problem versus structural change?
Shall I Sorry, Maria, you go ahead. Okay, so I'll kick off. So I came into this, I'm an engineer, right? I'm a simple manufacturing guy, and I came into this world from the world of smart cities with the idea that you could apply all sorts of technologies that have been developed for understanding of the urban environment and infrastructure and energy and transport to the natural world. And there's a lot in that. The big danger, like with smart cities and other sectors, is that you have great technology often looking for a commercial model. And there's a danger of having great technology looking to fix an incredibly complex challenge, which is nature. So my and the Cambridge spin out. I mean, the Cambridge work is out of the computer lab. They're initially funded by the Tezos Foundation. It's all based on Earth observation. They're knee deep in AI. We're getting into predictive analytics on on the likelihood of future extinction events based on changes in land cover. So we're up to our necks in data. But the really important question is is actually what is the challenge we're trying to solve here? What is the question we're trying to answer? Because there's every danger of just drowning in the data without really making any forward progress. We know about the carbon footprint of AI. We certainly don't want to be going too far down that path and kind of become a bit self-defeating. So I think it's a combination. I think structural change for sure, figuring out the KPIs, figuring out the key metrics, and then what's the minimum amount of data you need in order to answer that specific question should be the mantra I think we apply.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of new technology that will help us create trust here, because trust is one of the issues. We're talking about high, high credibility, at high quality, etc. And if you look at what creates a well-functioning financial market here, similar to a stock market, is that if we were sitting with 5 different ways of calculate the price for stocks, we would have a problem, or defining financial statements differently, or what is revenue, for instance. Just a very simple analogy, right? But the problem here is that we're looking to measure something that can be fairly subjective, and if you're not using technology, you can be way off, and that's not going to create trust. And no investor will not invest in something that has not been audited and verified. So here technology can come in and help actually create that trust, but also speed up the process. And if you look at what's coming in terms of, if I take a step back, if the companies we're looking at SBTI targets and different scope 1, 2, and 3, and when banks are doing it and reporting and calculating the different green asset ratios, etc. What we now see in our data, we have about 45,000 companies that we have emissions data on that is reported. There is up to 5 times if you then start using technology and actual emissions rather than the reported ones. Even if it's reported and not estimated, there's up to 5 times higher emissions in scope 1 for some of these emitters. So I think that technology will come in and sort of rewrite the map in this space quite significantly in all different aspects, not in the whole value chain of things here. So we should welcome that, and then we just need to find ways of how to simplify it to make it easier for what is a high quality carbon credit.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a balance that we need to find on, one, standardizing why we're using technology and what we need to get out of it. So, what's the standard results we need to see from every project type, regardless of whether it's nature or renewable natural gas or low carbon cement or a number of these like methane capture and leakage projects that are going on. There's a lot of different project types. And so a lot of companies or institutions look at them as commodities across different sectors that they act in. But how do we standardize that in a way that makes it a lot simpler to interact with? A ton is a ton, and at the end of the day, so paying $1,000 for a ton to offset versus $1.65 for a ton to offset doesn't make a lot of sense, in my personal perspective. And so we need to figure out what's that balance of technology to answer the questions and enable it to be simpler, but also move faster, not just get data for data's sake.
Matt, there's one other quick point I'd like to make here, and that's that the other role that technology has is making impact that is currently pretty quantitative, qualitative, sorry, more quantitative. So, what are currently called co-benefits that are actually the important things are typically pretty qualitative. The feedback I get from investors is they're really interested in how can they get a better handle on some of those other impacts beyond carbon. There's a big rush towards biodiversity credits. Let's copy all the mistakes of the carbon market and apply it to something hugely more complex. What could possibly go wrong, kind of thing. So we've got to be really careful with that. But technology has a huge role to play. Maria is absolutely right, of course, in really exposing what the real impact is, where the cause and effect is, trying to avoid unintended consequences of third-party interventions in some of the most important parts of the planet. These are all critical aspects. And also to Maria's point about instruments and reporting, there is nowhere to hide increasingly for corporates and others. There really is no excuse, but we do need to have the systemic.
Oh, I think Robin froze.
Yeah, so I just want to when Robin was speaking, I get deja vu from impact investing conversations of 10 years ago. Co-benefits and things like that. So these conversations are not new. We've had them for a decade now. So I think there's so much learnings to be had that we need to, but we're using a little slightly different terminology, which is a little stressful. I get a little PTSD because I've been in all of these conversations 10 years ago, and we have moved the needle in impact investing in for some of those projects, but seems like we're siloed, right? So there's a lot of learnings to be done here as well. So just want to remind everyone that you have colleagues in other sectors and industries who have been through this as well. How do you monetize? Is there a trade-off? Can there be a trade-off? All the SDGs investing has all that. That's what that's all about, right? So let's not forget about that and try to reinvent the wheel here again, that others have spent years on.
Yeah, does it feel like there's a lot of small sectors or markets that are trying to do the same thing, but they're calling it different things, and so they're unintentionally competing with each other and making it more difficult to solve the same goal?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And there's a lot, of course, there's a huge amount of duplication of effort as well.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I think that because there is a lot of activity happening, and some of it is very good. It's far from perfect, but if the direction of travel is right, then I think just focusing in, you've got VCMI and SBTI and some of these other initiatives that are struggling. Um, let's kind of put our shoulders to the wheel a little bit and push them forward and just see where it goes. Um, yeah, and encourage, as Maria was saying, learning from sectors, learning different sectors, and learning from the past as well. Not trying not to repeat some of the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, I think specifically on the voluntary side of things, there's been a lot of risk aversion, especially when it comes to technology. They've been working off of a system for the last 30 years, and transitioning that into something that's very technology forward is scary, and it's a lot easier to build a technology solution and bring it to a market than be in the market and try to change the system to be more technology forward. So we've kind of got those hurdles to work through. But I think with VCMI and SBTI and all the carbon market standards and the work in the regulated market, there's some hope over the next 2 years that that's going to happen. That we're going to see a pretty major transformation, and that quality is going to be priced differently than quantity is.
So
Yeah.
if I may, I'd like to now transition us to allow some of the participants with us to comment. I'm going
Mhm.
to end on one point, which goes to your third point, Matt, quantity over quality. Um, One of the things that occurs to me, I know it's not perfect, you and I have talked about it before. Here we have carbon credits trading on average down well under $10 in 2003. It was, less than $6 a metric ton carbon credit. The social cost of carbon of emissions themselves today is estimated, depending upon your source, at anywhere from 180 to well over $200 a ton of carbon. The highest priced carbon credits are the direct air capture DAC markets, where they're routinely now being sold at $1,500 a ton and under, and it will come down over time. So, here's the gap. We have a market right now pricing itself at under $10 a carbon credit, and we have a cost of a social cost and a cost of capture and reduction that is far in excess of that. So with that, I'd like to I'm just going to make that as a statement. It's not even a question. And Andreas, who's with us on the call, raised a very important point, and I'd like to ask him to now be willing to join us and say his piece.
All right, thanks, Bruce and Matt. Nice to see you. Nice to see everybody from the Digital Economist, and thanks for the panel. Can everybody hear me all right? I apologize, I'm on the road. But the first point that I raise is that I think that the first step to a well-functioning carbon market is, knowing that one carbon credit actually equals 1 ton. In the context of natural removals, that it actually equals 1 ton removed, right? I would go as far as saying, in terms of pricing carbon, if we just talk about the natural side of things, forgetting DAC, forgetting BECS, forgetting all these engineered solutions, I'm surprised the market is worth anything at all. Because how do you know? I'm sorry, but none of the methodologies, none of the approaches to quote unquote measuring 1 ton of carbon get anywhere near the kind of precision or confidence that you need to create a reliable financial instrument. And so with that being said, I guess, Matt, you and I we work on this together, our companies, trying to get to creating a market in which one carbon credit actually does equal 1 ton of carbon removed, or 1 ton of carbon equivalent removed. I guess I'd like to hear from all the panelists, what their expectations are from technology, from the solutions that are available, and what kind of steps we can take to arrive, at this first step to a well-functioning carbon market.
Hey, Christopher, I saw you put your hand up as Andreas was going through that. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Christopher Manefo. I'm with a company called Oxyzen based in Switzerland. These are very interesting questions and very pertinent questions. And so when we look at these things, and sometimes we need to not get lost by the trees and keep the forest in perspective. And so going back to first principles, so one area of confusion is we talk of CO2 reduction, 1 ton of CO2. And then on the other hand, we have a ton of carbon or a carbon price. What are we talking about? Is 1 ton of CO2 equal to 1 ton of carbon? The answer is no. There's a magnitude difference of 3.7. So 5,000 tons of CO2 equates to a sequestration needed of 1,364 tons of carbon. And so there's a huge confusion in the system between those two scientific principles. So that's number one. Number two, we need to also look at what are we talking about when we're talking of one market with one price, but then we're talking about emission avoidance, which is CO2. And then we're talking about carbon capture or carbon sequestration, which is C, which is carbon. So we're mixing bananas, with oranges, with tomatoes. And that leads to a situation where we have multiple methodologies. Each one is supposedly certified, but nobody can verify these. So if I make a statement that I am Tom Cruise, I have a certificate claiming I am Tom Cruise, and that idiot running around in Hollywood wearing Ray-Bans, he's fake because I have a certificate. That's a statement. Now, if that cannot be verified, then it adds confusion to the whole system. And that's part of the problem that we have in the current market. So these are some of the things that we need to really look at and we need to address. And so I will end with 4 points, 4 root causes, as I see it, as we have analyzed, that are the root cause of the problems within the voluntary carbon market. So first is multiple methodologies. We need to address that. We don't have enough transparency. We don't have enough data integrity, which leads to fraud, duplication. There are technical solutions that we can introduce or think about, such as now blockchain, etc. And a crucial question is the financial transparency. And that's a huge issue, which has caused the lack of trust in the market. And that's why the overall voluntary carbon market is eroding. If I'm purchasing, for example, a flight ticket, and then it says, do you want to offset? And I click yes, and my price goes up by $10. Now the question is, what happens to my $10 as a passenger, as a client? And nobody can offer any transparency whatsoever. As a matter of fact, if you run down that rabbit hole, you find out that you have supported the lifestyle of a whole bunch of intermediaries, but there was no effect. And that's the big issue here. So I'll end at that, and greetings to all. Cheers.
Thank you for that.
Can I just respond to that? Thanks, Christopher. Excellent points. Absolutely. And yeah, as much of every dollar, let's have 90 cents of every dollar at least getting to people on the ground rather than being sucked out of the system on the way. It's critical. But you make 2 really important points. One fundamental thing is, let's get the metrics right. Let's understand that we can compare like with like, and we're measuring one thing in a comparable way against another. And then allied to that, something that we've really been terrible at and really need to get a hold of is the messaging. We're all on this call. We've got some degrees of understanding, most people much more than I do. Everybody kind of out there, most people don't know what the hell we're talking about. We need to get much sharper, much clearer on the messaging. And what is a ton of carbon anyway? What does that mean? Clean air, clean water, availability of food, things like that. People can appreciate that. And we need to, think through what will change the way that people vote when it comes to elections in different parts of the world, in ways which will support what it is we are trying to do. And that starts with the messaging, telling stories, building narratives that connect people with nature in a way that just isn't happening.
Yeah, and Christopher, I've had quite a few discussions about one of the points that you made as well, where we have multiple carbon market standards, which if you look at any other market, that's not what you would call them. They would be standards bodies, and they are responsible for developing and publishing standards. But when Avera has a deforestation standard, and Gold Standard has a deforestation standard, and Biocarbon and Circarbano and GCC and a dozen other carbon market standards, projects that are trying to come in and work in that area and make that impact, they look at it and they're like, which one is the standard? What do I do? Is it Gold Standard? Is it Vera? And what it comes down to a lot of times is what credits are going to be the ones that are trusted and purchasable. And I think it's a huge fracture that it creates in the market, just in a misassociation of what a standard should be and how we're going to measure something. They should be working together in a way that it doesn't feel like they're working right now, to say, okay, we're going to publish one standard across all these standards bodies, and this is what we're going to agree on for deforestation or nature-based solutions or grasslands or what have you. Bruce, I can see something on the tip of your tongue.
I was just going to say, as we're running the clock down, Jose, do you want to allow us to go a little bit longer, or you want to hard stop it?
I think we should be responsible of everyone's time, so we should really go into the hour. But I think we still have a question that you wanted to go through. So I think let's go to that point, I think.
So
If I just want to just add one more thing for us to think about. The avoidance credits, I think, is a huge variable that is causing confusion in the system. If I set up a wind farm and I'm generating 2,000 megawatts of power, and then I say, okay, I am therefore avoiding emissions of X amount. What am I comparing that to? Am I comparing that to an old-fashioned coal power plant from the Soviet Union back in Poland, or am I comparing that to liquefied gas? Both are a fossil fuel, huge differential. So by default, you will use the most useless technology to compare to generate the most avoidance credits. And then I'm saying that I have done something good. Have I not? You see, so we need to also think about what I will call intellectual honesty. And that's a big thing that is missing in the system. So I'm just putting that out there as food for thought.
just to go with that for just a second, should there be different standards for carbon avoidance and for or CO2e avoidance and capture and sequestration? Should those two be sharply divided so that people aren't confusing what it is they're doing?
I would think so, yes.
That's interesting. That's my
Would that be moving into more of a commoditization approach where, you know, carbon is carbon, methane is methane, biodiversity is that, plastics, the co-benefits become their own individual assets that are also priced? Like, to what extent does that proliferate?
It's a good question. At the end of the day, are we pricing vegetables or are we pricing bananas, coffee, cocoa? You know, it's a philosophical question that we need to ask ourselves, you know.
I think context is important. I mean, I still, I put these in the comments. Clearly, the problem is understanding, but it's really understanding what's the point of carbon in the first place and how does it work. The more people understand that, the more they can better value the carbon in context. So I think it's generally an understanding of how does the carbon work, operate, function, what's its purpose in our world. It's not complicated from that perspective, but we keep overcomplicating it by talking about the financial aspects, and we're stuck in language of finance, not getting back to the baseline of what's carbon.
Oceana, I saw you come on camera and you had a few questions in the chat. Do you want to voice one of them?
Yeah, one of my questions was that I would love to get all of the institutional investors in. That would be amazing because, of course, they would bring in they would help us bring up the scale. However, and I understand that to bring them in, we need standardizations into how do we value a high quality, high integrity carbon credit. But I'm kind of asking you guys, are you not worried a little bit by giving a little bit too much standardization then we kind of miss sometimes the level of detail needed to when you're looking at projects locally? And you're maybe giving them co-benefits, and maybe one project will need this amount of co-benefits and the other it'll be better to have other co-benefits. And if you're valuing certain co-benefits more, then how do you kind of compare projects for their local needs?
Let me respond to that really quickly. It's a really good point. Um, when I'm working with so two things. One is it's important to understand the difference between investors and buyers of carbon credits. Their motivations are very different. The problems that they face are exactly the same. The transparency, oversimplification of the situation, so on and so forth. Um, What's interesting is when you're talking to pension funds and insurance companies and others operating in those very long time, sort of 30 to 50-year timescales, they may use Vera, they may apply a standard when they're looking at a project, but it's a bit like a quality checklist. It's a bit like when you go to the bathroom, there's a tick on the door that somebody's cleaned in the last hour. That's how they look at that. What they do beyond that is go to the best available science and apply that to really understand this project as an investment opportunity. What are the risks associated with it? Am I comfortable with that? And how can I mitigate the risk and manage that over time? So critical challenge, I think, is to help to create projects that are resilient to improvements in the science so that they don't collapse, they don't fall over, they don't start falling back as new science becomes available. The case in point is Vera and the voluntary carbon market and overcrediting. But there is another kind of intriguing set of questions around do we need carbon credits at all? If you're a pension fund, you're not really interested in what these carbon credit things are. It's a long-term asset investment, and you'll have your own ways of dealing with that. Carbon credits may or may not help with that. And then my final point is that what takes in the future a carbon credit from $10 a ton to $100 a ton are what are currently called co-benefits. And that's also what pension funds and insurance companies are like. If we get carbon right and a ton is a ton and it's understood, it's like gold priced around the world, then it's all the other stuff that's interesting. And whether credits are appropriate at all for biodiversity, for example, is a really, really open question. Let's just get the metrics right. Let's understand what performance measures are important and what measures of performance are going to drive behavior in the right kind of way. Soon as you derive a standard, you automatically go into the lowest common denominator because that's what a standard does. It doesn't push you forward.
I think those are very good questions. I just want to add a financial markets perspective to things. So a few years ago, 2015, we were working on the SDGs, and then we were hoping that the investors would invest in the SDGs. No one's really invested in the SDGs. There are very few funds that are SDG classified because how do you measure if medical pharma companies producing vaccines that are saving lives, but then they're polluting the rivers where they have their factories, human rights abuse, et cetera, et cetera. So it is really complicated, but the SDGs as an investment for allocating capital actually has failed a little bit in that sense. But another big trend right now, and so the financial markets want to make money, right? And what they're now looking at, a big trend is how do you make money in private markets? And no one ever thought that a retail investor would get access to what was private markets. But now we have State Street, Apollo, others are now issuing ETFs for retail investors. So my dream is whatever we think about carbon credits or the markets getting involved here, but if that can help advance the climate agenda, I would love for my kids one day to be able to invest in ETFs for carbon removal projects. Why would we limit it to institutional investors? Why not have all the retail investors? Wouldn't that be beautiful? But that would require completely different ways to Robin's point here, where we need to advance the way that we're measuring and going back to a standard. Just food for thought. Retail ETFs, carbon removal.
I agree.
All right, so we're coming up on time here. I think it would be a good point for us to have some final remarks. So on my side, a few takeaways. We need simplification. We need some degree of interoperability, and we need to start to lean on technology, but we don't want to do technology for technology's sake. We want to make sure we understand why we're using it, what's the outcome that we're trying to generate. And it's not just carbon. It's carbon, it's biodiversity, it's plastic removal, it's enforcing local communities. And that's going to look different in different areas. A ton of carbon in West Africa is going to have a different co-benefit structure and impact than a ton of carbon in Missouri. And so how we get those to a comparable value and kind of weight that, I think, is going to shift. So it's going to be really interesting because I think that's a very technology focused problem, is how do we figure out what that weight is between a ton of carbon in North America or the US and a ton of carbon in South America or a developing country, and how do we have them have the same kind of parity and trust and liquidity, but show the impact differently. So that's my major takeaway today. I'll hand it off Jose, Bruce, Maria, or Robin, if you want to take it from there.
So my final thought, and then I'll open it to the other panelists. My interest is in getting to a circular economy and a regenerative economy in the fastest way possible. And right now, it is an impossibility, almost simply driven by accounting principles, that we do not account corporately for a carbon credit. A verified carbon credit now is an intangible asset on the balance sheet, and climate risk of climate change is a annual report item, right? Neither of which has any bearing, any meat to the bones. And I think there just needs to be a fundamental shift toward a circular economy standard, whatever that looks like, in whatever ways that looks like, and then work backwards from that becomes the standard rather than the linear extractive economy that we experience today.
Thank you, Bruce. I don't know if Maria, Robin would like to finalize anything from your side.
I'll just quickly jump in. I think it's really important to imagine, for us all to imagine, what the future market for nature and for carbon looks like in 10 years' time, and then figure out how to get there from here. And it might not be the route we were expecting. We don't have time to carry on with this incremental moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. It needs systemic change. We need to be bold and confident. I'm really optimistic. We've got the science, we've got the technology. There's an interested big investor pool looking for solutions. We just need to do it.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that. I mentioned in the beginning, Bloomberg, New York Stock Exchange, ICE. There are very big players coming in from a financial markets perspective, and we need to have conversations with them about how they can play a part in making these market works for the secondary market that will help drive our market forward.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Matt. And thanks, Bruce, for this amazing discussion. And also thanks everyone that participated in both contributed with your insights as well, but also that joined us and listened today. So I'm very happy. This was as I said, first of a series of roundtables that we will have now predominantly every 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks' time, we'll be here again on the 13th of March, and the topic will be around AI policy and bridging the AI divide between the global South and global North. So I hope to see you here, and I hope that you enjoyed, and see you soon. Thank you very much.